So we're on the road to the American Revolution. And it all really started with the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. Now, this war was spurred by English colonists moving beyond the Allegheny Mountains into the Ohio River Valley, and the French and Native Americans taking actions to stop that, like building French forts throughout the region. The actual war got started when George Washington leads a small unit of English troops into the Ohio River Valley and tries to attack and take Fort Necessity, one of those French forts. He absolutely fails, but this is going to spur this war, which will actually put us on the road to the American Revolution. One of the very first things that the English are going to try to do is get the colonies involved. The English were looking for some help from the colonies in fighting this war. In fact, the Albany Plan of Union was designed to bring some coordination between the English and the colonial militias to defend the colonies. And what you had at the Albany Plan, or under the Albany Plan of Union, was a meeting between 7 colonies. Representatives from 7 different colonies are going to go to Albany, New York. Now, the goal of the colonists when they go to Albany is to try to obtain an alliance with the Iroquois nation. The Iroquois were maintaining their neutrality in this war because, quite honestly, they were smart. They're going to side up with whoever wins this war because they want that trade alliance. So they're kind of stepping back from this. Ben Franklin is going to take another plan in with him. He developed a plan that would unite the colonies, all 13 of them, under a central government. The idea was this central government would work with the English government and coordinate, defense of the colonies, but they would do that by creating a government that would collect taxes from all 13 colonies to fund a colonial militia. Well, all the other colonies are absolutely going to reject this because, quite honestly, they collect their own tax dollars and they don't want their tax dollars to go to another colony. And they didn't want one government in the colonies to have too much power. Remember, they're existing under this idea of salutary neglect. They haven't had any interference from the royal government. Why would they want interference from a colonial government? And so they didn't want to share their power. They didn't want anyone else to really have power over their individual colony. So the Albany Plan of Union is going to fail. However, it does plant seeds for future unification of the colonies. The idea is planted in their head. When you look at the French-Indian War, we're not going to get too far in depth in it. There were some advantages that both sides had. I mean, the British, they're coming in with their strongest navy in the world, and they outnumbered the French 15-1. The French, though, had the Native Americans. They had way more Native American allies than the British did. And the French were actually more disciplined and more loyal to their government. The one thing that the British did at the beginning of this war is they kind of tried to divide the war up into 4 separate parts. You had a part being fought in the south, and that the Spanish were actually an ally to the French, and they were trying to invade Georgia, of all places, from Florida. You had, a New England army, you had, middle colony armies, and they were kind of all doing their own thing. The biggest advantage the British had in this war was when William Pitt came in. William Pitt's going to come in about halfway through this war, and he is going to unify all 4 armies and say we're going to fight as one. And even though the French had a better command structure at the beginning, William Pitt is going to unify the British forces, British and colonial forces, and he is going to basically at that point take it to the French. And the big thing that the British had over the French, way too much territory that the French had to defend. I mean, if you remember that map, over half of, what we knew of the North American continent was controlled by the French. And how are they going to control that? Keep in mind, they're also still fighting over in Europe. So the forces are, kind of limited at this point. Obviously, the English are going to win this war, and they're going to settle it with the Treaty of Paris of 1763. This, I would consider honestly a turning point in the history of America because of certain things that happened as a result of this treaty. First of all, let's look at the conditions of the treaty, what each country agreed to. First of all, France loses everything. Just keep that in mind. They lose all their Canadian possessions, they lose their empire in India, and they lose their lands east of the Mississippi. So basically on that map, all that blue we saw, gone. France has nothing. Spain, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, was an ally of France. They're going to lose a little bit too, but here's what's interesting. Spain got all of the land that France had west of the Mississippi. This is important because had Spain not gotten that land, England would have had that from the beginning. That land that I'm talking about, that's west of the Mississippi, is what will become the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. There'll be more to come on that later, but I just want to kind of put that foundation in there for you. Spain is also going to get the Port of New Orleans, also very important because the Port of New Orleans is the waterway to the Mississippi River, and Spain will control that. They are, in the Treaty of Paris, though, going to give Florida to England. So you're going to see some land switching hands here. And I'm going to show you a map here in just a minute, but just keep that in mind. There's a lot of backroom deals going on with the Treaty of Paris. And finally, England got all of the French lands in Canada, and here's a big one. They got exclusive rights to the Caribbean slave trade. Now think back to the Second Imperial War, Queen Anne's War. In the Peace of Utrecht, they got the asiento. They got the monopoly of the slave trade coming into South America. Now that is, that's a 30-year period that leads right up to this time period we're at right now. Now they have exclusive slave trade rights coming to the Caribbean. And that's where a lot of slaves are going to come into North America by way of the Caribbean. So big effect on the future of America right here. England will also get commercial dominance in India. They're going to establish the West India Trading Company and the East India Trading Company. Both of these will play a role in some of the relationship between England and the colonies very soon. This is what North America looked like after the French and Indian War. Please notice the green represents France. Look carefully and tell me if you can find France on this map. Basically, right down here. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but right down in the bottom right corner, see Santo Domingue. I don't know if that's how you say it. There it is. That's all France has left after the French-Indian War. England has all that other land, and you can see Spanish Louisiana. That will later become the Louisiana Territory, which we will purchase from France. Yeah, France, I'm telling you, they're going to get it back. Napoleon's going to play a key role in that, but that's 40 years from now. But I just want to show you that Spain has control of it now. So the effects of this war on the the colonials, well, how did this really affect them? Number one, it's going to unite them. This is the first time the 13 colonies has had a common goal, and in this case a common enemy, the French and the Native Americans. It's also going to create this socializing experience. Understand that if I was a Virginia colonist, I never went to the New York colony, I never went to the South Carolina colony, I stayed where I was. But in fighting a war, colonists traveled throughout the 13 colonies, and they learned about different, I guess, cultures, if you will, throughout the American colonies. And finally, it's going to actually create some bitter feelings towards Great Britain that are going to intensify. Leading up to the French-Indian War, American colonists, or I should say English colonists, were proud to be part of the English Empire. You're going to start seeing some waves of dissent because of the feelings after the French-Indian War. And this is why. The British view, when you look at the 7 Years' War, the British thought, well, the colonists contributed, but they didn't contribute enough. They should have been carrying the mantle of this war. And they said they kept looking to us, the English, to us to defend them and for us to, win them the land. They said, the English, view is that the colonists are the ones who really benefited from this war. I mean, England, yeah, they got India, but in North America, you're not going to have, the English government sending a whole bunch more people over there. It was the colonists who benefited. And what's going to start happening is after this war, that's when the English are going to say, you know what, these colonists, they're doing their own thing, and they didn't help us out enough for this. We're going to have to take back some control, because let's face it, it's Mother England, and you're the colonies. You need to start listening to your mama a little bit more, okay? The colonial view, though, was, oh, wait a minute, not only did we contribute in the French and Indian War, but we also were there in King William's War, and Queen Anne's War, and the other imperial wars. We've been here this whole time, and we've been contributing. And because we contributed, because we fought alongside of you in this war, we should, to the victor goes the spoils. We should be able to go into those frontier lands that we won. And now England is starting to talk about keeping us out of those lands. That's a big deal. So why was England so intent on keeping them out of the lands that they had won in the French-Indian War? We'll get to that here in just a minute. Wars cost a lot of money. I don't know if you realize that. And England's looking at the colonists and saying, you know what? Let's go back to these, their viewpoint. They said that we fought this war for you, and you were unwilling to defend it for themselves, and it cost us a ton of money to do it. And you know what? That war is going to add to British debt. Look at this. There's the British debt following the French and Indian War. I mean, it was high at the beginning, but it grew from almost 75 million pounds to almost 135 million pounds. And they blamed that completely on the colonies. They're like, we came and fought for you. Someone's got to pay for this. And so they're going to start looking at their empire and looking at, maybe the economic advantage is not as strong as we thought it was. So these things we've been overlooking, like smuggling and ignoring the Navigation Acts, maybe we should step in and take a little bit more control. Even before the war ended, the British government started to exert more control on the colonies. In 1761, they started issuing writs of assistance. And basically what this is it's kind of like a warrant, a search warrant, but without any legal backing. Like today, if the police want to come and search your home, they have to go to a judge and say, hey, we think that this home has illegal goods in it, and this is the evidence we have that leads us to think that. And the judge can say, well, I think you're right. Here's a warrant. You can go search it. Or the judge can say, you know what? Not enough. I don't want to send you in there without enough evidence. Well, a writ of assistance basically was like a warrant, but without having to present any evidence. It just says that customs officials, British customs officials, had the right to search any commercial establishment without authorization from anybody. Well, James Otis was a transportation specialist or a shipper in the colonies, and he is going to have a writ of assistance imposed on him. And he is going to challenge that in the English courts, and he's going to say that the protection of a citizen's private property has to be held higher than anything, higher than any parliamentary law or anything like that. We have the right to private property. Now he's going to lose. Parliament is going to say, or the courts are going to say, that parliamentary law and customs have equal weight. So this custom, or this idea of the protection of private property, is only as valuable as Parliament says it is. So if Parliament says that we can search your property, that idea just goes away. But if this sounds familiar, this is why we have in the Bill of Rights that you cannot have an illegal search and seizure. So what we're starting to see as we move through, and I know this is a lot, but we're starting to see foundational elements coming out of the treatment of English colonists by the government that will become part of our government today that protects us from the same things happening over and over again. So what about the other part of the war? The Native Americans. What happened to them? Well, let me introduce you to a chief, an Ottawa chief by the name of Pontiac. Pontiac and the Ottawa, as you know, fought with the French. And I don't know if you realize this, but none of the Native Americans were invited to the negotiations at the Treaty of Paris. So once that was signed, Pontiac and other Native Americans were kind of taken aback when English settlers started moving into the territory that they gained from France. And Pontiac saw that as a threat. And so he is going to form a confederation of other Native American tribes, and they are going to start pushing back. In fact, the English are going to start inhabiting a lot of the French forts that had been built along that western frontier, and Pontiac is going to lead coordinated attacks against those English forts. At the same time, the English colonists are kind of taking matters into their own hands. The Paxton Boys are a group of Scots-Irish in western Pennsylvania who are going to start attacking Native Americans in the region, trying to push them back. This had the propensity of turning into an all-out war. It's contained in this Ohio River Valley right now. But remember, England is just coming out of the 7 Years' War, and the 7 Years' War actually brought an end to the Second 100 Years' War. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 ended all that. So England wants to basically squash this before it gets too far out of hand. So they're going to start moving more English troops into the Ohio River Valley to protect the settlers and protect the Native Americans as well. This is going to lead to what's known as the Proclamation Line of 1763. The Proclamation Line of 1763, major turning point. Underline it, circle it, put a star beside it. Because what the Proclamation Line of 1763 said was that English colonists could not move west of that line. They were limited to the territory of the original 13 colonies. It also promised the Native Americans that all that land west of the line would basically be for them. And the English were going to protect the natives from settlers coming in, and they were going to protect the settlers by not letting them go into Indian territory. Huge turning point, because what you see here is the English basically forbidding the freedom of movement of the colonists. First step, well, after the French-Indian War, that's going to lead to the American Revolution, which we will talk about next time. Because you think that the Proclamation Line is going to cause some resentment? Wait till England starts calling in the tab for the bill for the French and Indian War. We'll talk about that next time. See you later. Thanks for watching.